So let's talk about what an isomer is. Now, please do not mix this up with words like isotopes. Very easy to do that. Even though the first three letters are the same, and in fact that's what iso means, same, they don't mean the same thing. It's apples and cars, not even apples and oranges, okay? So isomers, not isotopes, are basically structures that are made, like two different structures that are made of the same components, but they're put together differently. Glucose and fructose are two different sugars, but they have the same molecular components. The easiest way I can explain what this is take 100 different Legos, okay, and build yourself a ship. Now break it up, use the same 100 Legos, and make a tree. Now break it up and use those same 100 Legos and make a bird. What I'm saying here, it's made of the same components, you are just making different structures, and those different structures are going to function differently. Is that clear what that is? Because I've been told that people get mixed up with what isomers are, but just think of the Legos. You'll be fine with it. But don't get mixed up with isotopes. And then also we got something else we'll talk about probably next week. We have something called isotonic. But just know what the prefix iso means. Same, no change. And there's no change in the molecular components. Okay? Now there's three different types of isomers. We have structural isomers, and I'll show you examples of this, that are different covalent arrangements of the atoms. We also have geometric isomers, and this is the one I was trying to show you before, if there's one on top and one on the bottom, but it's the same covalent arrangements, but in a different spatial arrangement. And I'll show you what I mean by that. These are referred to as cis and trans. If you're thinking, is that something like trans fats and cis fats? Yes, and we'll get into that. Okay? We also have, and how do you pronounce that? Everybody says it differently. All right? So Enantiomers. This word, okay, you'll recognize it, are mirror images of each other. Meaning, you're looking at your right hand and you're looking at your left hand. I mean, they're very similar, but they're mirror images, right? Does that make sense? Okay? Unless you start doing this and you really confuse people. Right? But they have different terms to go with them, the L and D form, and I've also seen the R and S form. I don't know what they stand for, I won't ask you. That's chemistry. We'll learn more about that later. Okay? But that's where they fall into. They're the left and right sides. So these are structural isomers. They're made of isomers, they're made of the same components. But structurally, here it's in a line like a chain, and then we're branching it. Still with single bonds. Just structurally rearranged. This is geometric. These are the ones I was telling you about, the cis and trans. When there's a double bond there, that carbon cannot flip around, cannot swirl or rotate. So therefore, there's a hydrogen here or something here. They can't, it's either one's on the top, one's on the bottom. So you could either have them on the same side or on opposite sides. I think of them the same like sisters. They're sisters to each other, cis. Or are they across from each other, like a transatlantic thing, right? Going across. So that would be trans. Is that clear about those? All right, we're going to see more of these. I'm introducing you, but when we get into other things, you're going to see some. I'm going to use these terms. And then you have these, well, that word. All right? And they are mirror images of each other. Where they're not going to be the same, but they're similar, like your left and right hand. And these could be L and D or S and R. So these are important in the pharmaceutical industry. They may have different, Enantiomers, okay? But these are, like for instance, here you have like ibuprofen, which is Motrin. Okay, Motrin that you can buy over the counter. It's for pain or inflammation. Well, you can see that there's two different forms over here. The left and right. And the pharmaceutical company can make both of those. But they realize that the S form is the effective one. The R form does nothing. Likewise, albuterol, which is a medication like an inhaler for asthma people. Again, this is the effective form, the R form, and the S form is not. So it doesn't matter if the R or the S, you can't say that all the S's are going to be effective and all the R's are not. They have to do clinical trials to see which one's going to work. This is all important. How many people want to go in the pharmaceutical agency? No, okay. But it's important. Why? Because you or your family might need these medications. And you'll see it, the active ingredient, you'll see it under S or L. It'll do all those little letters there. You'll see where that comes in. Let's give some knowledge of that. Okay. So let's talk about functional groups. Now we have a chain of carbons, we could have a ring of carbons, but what things could be attached to these carbons? So there's a long list, well not long, but 7 things you need to know. There's these chemical groups, distinct molecular components attached to this, we'll call it a carbon backbone, whether it's a ring or a chain. And we have these functional groups, whether it's an OH or just an O that's connected with 2 double bonds. And these chemical groups are directly responsible for the chemical reaction that you're going to see throughout the rest of science. Okay? These are less stable than its carbon backbone, but it's the most likely to react. Okay? It may be polar or nonpolar. So it may be water-soluble and dissolve in water, it might not. But when we get into how cells are formed, and you have a membrane around it, we're also going to understand that certain things are allowed to cross the membrane, and certain things aren't, and it depends on if it's polar or nonpolar. There's 7 major functional groups that are important in biology. Now let me just show you what I mean. This is estrogen and this is testosterone, right? Estrogen is the major hormone in females. Testosterone is a major hormone in males. They both have this same carbon skeleton, which is basically 4 rings, which is a steroid. Okay? But what's happening is that there's things that come off of this skeleton these little functional groups, and that's what's going to define if this is estrogen or testosterone. In other words, the functional groups are the same. There's one we'll get into, but that's an alcohol, that's a methyl group over here. There's this over here, and there's one under here. These are the same, but there's functional groups that are different between them, and that's going to act differently. It's going to go on a certain receptor. Because this is made this way, this will go on an estrogen receptor. Because it's made this way, this can go on a testosterone receptor. And like I showed you before, we can actually synthetically make some of these medications. Well, these are hormones, but if someone needs more estrogen, then we might not use the whole backbone, but we'll use the part, the functional group that is going to be able to go to the receptor in our body. And I kind of showed you that with endorphins and morphine. So here's the functional groups. Now on this page that I'm going to do, this slide over here, I'm going to run through them pretty quickly. And then I'll have a slide for each individual one, and I'm going to go even quicker. The reason why all the information is really on there, and for me to just spit out all this stuff, it's going to go in one ear, out the other. It's really just rote memorization. And the best way to do this is to do flashcards. You have 7 flashcards, you put the structure and the name of the structure on the front, on the back, you put all your information. And you just flip those. Again, I will never ask you to draw out these structures, but I will ask you to recognize what these structures are if I point to it, okay? So the first one is this, a hydroxyl group, an alcohol. All right, and this is a polar thing. And I'll show you what these look like in the next slides. We also have something called the carbonyl group. And we have 2 different types, both that are polar. A ketone, if it's actually attached to the middle of the carbon skeleton, or an aldehyde if it's actually attached to the end of the carbon skeleton. And you'll see what that is. We also have a carboxyl group. This is a good example of why spelling counts. It's only changed by 1 letter. So if you're going to write it someplace, you've got to make sure you spell it correctly. A carboxyl group is an acid, and it is polar. We sometimes refer to it as the carboxylic acid or the organic acid. We also have an amino group, or also known as an amine group, or amine. And that also is polar. So hydroxyl group is nonpolar. This part is not going to be water soluble in water. We refer to it as a thiol group. It's got a sulfur to it, as the name implies, sulfur. We also have the phosphate group. We'll talk about that a lot when we talk about one of the most important energy components in our body called ATP. But it's an organic phosphate and it is polar. And the last one is a methyl group. It's also known as a methylated compound. Now this is not reactive to anything. However, it's a recognizable marker that other substances will recognize. And you'll see as we go along what that is. But it doesn't react. It just, another substance might see this and say, oh, this is where we got to go, guys. Come on, let's go over here. All right? All right. So there's a hydroxyl, and that is an alcohol. So if it has an OH over there, okay? And these can form hydrogen bonds with water molecules, and we'll talk about those, okay? So, like I said, on a flashcard, you could have hydroxyl and draw a picture of it on the front. Put alcohol in parentheses. And on the back, put this information here. Leave some room. You might want to revisit these cards on other chapters or later on in the chapter and add things to it. Does that make sense? Okay. Carbonyl group. Now this is the one we could have two different ones, a ketone or an aldehyde. And really it's a carbon with a double bond to an oxygen. If it's in the middle of this chain, so in other words, you've got a carbon, 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 and the double bond is right where the in the middle here, so the double bonded oxygen is here, that's going to be a ketone, like acetone. One little thing I learned when I took organic chemistry in college, all those wonderful scents that you smell, like artificial banana scents and perfumes, all that kind of stuff, all the scents, they're mostly ketones. Okay, just to give you an idea. And so it's not just stuff that's in our bodies, we're using it for other things that you enjoy, right? If the double bonded carbon-oxygen occurs at the end of the chain, so there's not another C here, it's just a carbon on one side and not on the other side, let me call it an aldehyde, so there's an H there, right? Again, put this in here, you might want to make two cards for this. One for ketones, one for aldehydes. Or you might want to put on both. This is where there is no right or wrong. And again, put things on here that would make some sense. The carboxyl group, or carboxylic acid. And basically, it's a carbon attached to a double bonded oxygen, but instead of an H here like an aldehyde, you're going to have, I don't want to call it an alcohol, but an OH, hydroxide area to it. And that makes an acid. We're going to see that with amino acids, which make proteins. Amino, or an amine group, is basically, there's going to be a nitrogen there attached to two hydrogens. We'll also see that in an amino acid, as the name implies. A sulfohydryl group, again, it's a sulfur. You'll see it in certain amino acids, specifically something called cysteine, which we'll get into later on. And a phosphate is a phosphate group here, and it's connected to 4 oxygens with a double bond of 1. Amazing how this gets bound to a certain, it could be bound to another phosphate group. So you could have 3 phosphate groups linked together. You could have 2, you could have 1, but one of them will be attached to a carbon chain. This bond that's over here is a crucial bond for you to see when we talk about ATP, because it releases a huge amount of energy. And the methyl group is just a carbon with 3 hydrogens attached to it. It's going to be at the end of the molecule. It's a marker. It doesn't really do much, but it's there as a marker. So this is the summary of them all. The only one that's not shown up there is the methyl group. But it just gives you, major molecules, what they have in them, what they are, what they look like. All right? Questions about that? I know I went pretty fast, but it's really just me just telling you what they do, and it's going to be in one ear out the other. And I'd rather spend more time on the next chapter, which is huge.